So we're making Grandma Kay's Klatskis. Uncle Dave's gonna learn as we go through the process of making it. So for the filling, you need 2 pounds of ground beef, 8 slices of bacon, half an onion, and some salt and pepper. So that's what we're gonna make right now. We're just gonna chop up some onion. You know a story about Grandma and the onion?
Oh, Grandma always used to, cry every once in a while when she did the onions. And as she got a little bit older, she used to do a little cheat. She'd have a bag of frozen chopped onions at the go, and made it easier for her to make things done, get things done. So, and I think it would be okay to use it if you wanted to, but traditionally we like to do fresh onions.
So I'm just gonna chop these onions till they're like diced. You don't want super big pieces.
Yep.
And this is a full onion, so I use maybe a medium size. But if you want to use Grandma Kay's sheet, go ahead. Okay,
Yep.
so after you chop the onion and you put half of an onion into your pan, just let it sit there. It's not on heat yet. And now you have to dice up your bacon. The recipe calls for, my recipe calls for 8 slices. Grandma's original recipe called for 5 to 6 slices, but Grandma Cernak's recipe actually was just 3 slices. So as you can see, as we get richer and we get to add more bacon. So go ahead and chop that up and dice it up and chop it up. Bacon is probably the hardest to dice when it's
Room temperature?
Yep, room temperature, refrigerated. So if you want, you can go ahead and throw it in the freezer for an hour just to get it more firm, and it'll dice a lot more easy. I do not recommend using the pre-cooked bacon. It just doesn't have as much flavor. What we're trying to create is that flavor profile with the onions and the bacon, and if you use the pre-cooked from the store, all that good fat and flavor is rendered out already, so you're not going to get that flavor in your meat pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and chop this up and add it to my pan, and I'll be back in a minute. So the next thing you do, you have your 8 slices of bacon diced and your half onion diced into a frying pan or a saucepan, and you turn it on to cook these items. And you don't want to overcook them. It's not to crisp, it's just to get those onions nice and soft, and they turn about golden brown, and then the bacon is rendered, but it's not crispy. So we don't want to overcook this for sure, because again, that's where all of the flavor is when we go ahead and add it to the meat later. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. With my cooktop, it's an electric. I just start with a high just to get the heat up there, and then I'll turn it back probably around to medium high. It takes about, I would say maybe 15 minutes to get that to where you want. Again, you don't want high heat because you want that bacon just to be the soft cooked phase. So we'll see you back in 15 minutes. All right, so it's been about 15 minutes, and your onion and bacon saute should look like this about, so that the onion is golden brown, which is what you want, but your bacon isn't it's not crisp, it's still very pliable, and this whole thing will go to your 2-pound mixture. So when you get your ground beef, you want to add everything to it, all the wonderful juices, just add it right in. So Dave, you had asked if I want to drain this. Definitely not. I want all those wonderful flavors that we get from the bacon, all that rendered fat. That's what's going to give that filling a nice flavor. So then to this, the recipe calls for salt and pepper. Right? Salt and pepper to taste, but generally as a rule of thumb, about a teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to measure. And it's basically to salt that ground beef that you have in there. And I do a few rolls of pepper, maybe a pinch of pepper, about a teaspoon of salt. And then you want to mix this in really well. So if your ground beef is in a roll, or you got it from the grocery store, it's in that log, you kind of want to break it up first, just so that you can easily just incorporate that bacon and onion into there without, you're not making a meatloaf, so you don't want to push it together. And then also, you're just trying to get it incorporated so that every little piece of the filling, the little meatball that's inside the pocket, has some flavor to it. So your ground beef is not cooked, so you want to make sure that this onion and bacon saute is cool, because you don't want to add that and cook your meat. So this is going to either set aside, or you can throw back in the fridge if you're worried about it being out too long. It doesn't matter either way. I had just taken the beef out, so it's okay. It can probably sit on the counter here until we get the next step, which is our dough. All right, so you mixed your bacon and onion mixture into your meat. Now you have to make the dough. Well, we have a few corrections from the original recipe that Grandma gave me, and not really sure if I transcribed it incorrectly, but we, through a little trial and error, we figured out what is a better ratio to liquids to flours, and you probably can go online and get even more specific details. But the recipe now calls for 4 cups of flour. So this flour measurement right now will do about half of your meat mixture. So far I've had to make 2 times this recipe to the 2 pounds of meat. You may even have a little bit more meat left over. So you may be able to make a half of a recipe, dough recipe, but that's for you to figure that out however you decide to make your dough. Right now this recipe calls for 4 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 4 eggs beaten with a beater. Actually, it'd be 1 teaspoon of salt because we halved the recipe. 1 teaspoon of salt, and 4 eggs beaten with 1/3 cup of water. So what we did is we cracked the eggs, 4 eggs, into a bowl, added a teaspoon of salt, and added the 1/3 cup of water, and mixed it up well. And so that we had our bowl, we used a bowl this time and not the top or wherever you're mixing the dough recipe, in a bowl, pretty decent size, maybe this size bowl is fine. We actually used this size bowl for 4 cups, put a little well in the middle of the 4 cups of flour, and added the beaten eggs and water mixture right into the center. And then with a wooden spoon or a fork, you just continue to mix until you feel like all of the moisture is absorbed by the flour. And so if you need to, in which I had to with my particular recipe, is add about a 1/3 cup more water to incorporate all that extra flour. So it was too dry for me to roll it yet. So I just kept adding water little by little until that dough came together, and you can kind of tell either way. So you want it to be moist but not too sticky. So if it's too sticky, you want to add back flour, but you want it to be moist enough to collect any of the little bits of flour that are in your bowl, because you want everything that's in that bowl, all 4 cups of flour with the eggs and water. And then you just knead it until it's all combined, and then you get this lovely dough. And this is half of it, because like I said, we've been doing some trial and error, and now we're ready to roll it out. So I've already used half of it because I was just kind of playing around with the texture of the dough, and you have this lovely dough here. So I'm going to use this half, and I'm going to go ahead and roll it out. I find it easier to work with half of the dough recipe because I don't have a very big workspace, but that's, you know, up to you and how you practice, and the more you do it, the more you'll know how to work with each dough. But this half, I was waiting, and while I was waiting, I put it in the bowl and then put a wet or damp paper towel over the top so it doesn't dry out. So now I want to make sure that my work surface is well floured. So your dough is not overly dry. It's moist, but it's not tacky. So I want to add a little bit of flour to my dough, put it in the center here, and then I also want to add a little bit of flour to my rolling pin. And then I'm going to just slowly work the dough out from the center out. And then you also want to turn it and add flour. Ideally, you kind of want more of a rectangle shape than a circle because you get more out of the dough that way. Because we put these little Klatskis into squares or triangles, rectangles, I'm sorry. And so you kind of want your dough to be more square or angular instead of circular. But as you do it more and more, you'll figure it out. And you also can pull it as well to help with that gluten, stretch it out. So your primary goal is really to get it to about it says a 1/4 inch thickness, but even a little bit thinner than that, because remember, you're gonna fold it on top of each other when you seal up the edges. I'm trying to get as much surface area, and what I found just doing it today is you're gonna get anywhere from 10 to 12 little pockets of dough. And I'll show you what I'm talking about as soon as I get this rolled out to how I like it. So if you can see the dough here, it's not quite rectangular. It's really hard to get that perfect rectangle, but like I said, more square than circle is probably going to give you more little Klatskis to work with. Okay, so whenever you think you have it, it's a little thick in the middle, and that's one of those things where it's kind of hard to tell if you're really, because the outside is thinner. You don't want it to be see-through because it's got to be strong enough for when it's cooking to be able to hold that meat ball inside. But then you don't want it too thick, so all you're tasting is the dough. Okay, I think I'm just about done here. All right. All right, so when you have your dough rolled out to your likeness, take a little teaspoon-sized ball and you want to put it, and again, this is where it helps if it's straight. You don't want to make them too big either. Then what you're going to do is fold it on top of it. So you're going to actually pull that dough. You're stretching it a little bit and pulling it over. I don't know if I could fit another one in there. I'll try to do that. And I was able to. Take a little knife, if you have one of those little pie wheels, that works too. And then you're just gonna cut them into your little rectangles. And what I do is I just set them aside. And I'll crimp them all at the same time. So the goal is you're trying to make as many of these out of this dough as possible. So because I know my center is a lot thicker than my outside, I'm gonna try to roll that middle a little bit thinner every time I cut a roll. Okay, looks pretty good. And then I'm gonna keep repeating it. You don't need a lot of extra dough on the ends. You just need enough to be able to crimp it at the end. So I would say about a teaspoon full of meat. And again, we're gonna pull and then fold over. So it's almost like making raviolis, although I've never made raviolis. You can see that my middle part is a lot thicker. Get a little bit of more meat in here. I'm gonna go ahead and cut that. And it's okay if it's a little bit sticky. Actually, this is really thick here in the middle. I'm gonna be able to get 3 out of this. Sometimes you realize you have a little bit more dough. I'm gonna go ahead and roll this a little bit. Take the meat out of there. It's gross, but it'll work. Stretch it. I can probably get 3 out of this one. The dough is really thick in that middle. Rolling the dough is probably the hardest part, making the dough and rolling the dough out, trying to get a rhythm so you're getting somewhat uniform stuff, but again, I was able to get 3 out of that one. Okay, and then cut it, because then you're gonna pull.
Doesn't take as long for you to roll it out now either, does it?
No, it doesn't, but it's still a little bit thick in the middle.
Yeah, well, that's
So
one of
I'm
those
gonna-
things where that's why one of those other roll pans and with the.
It might work, I guess. I don't know. I think it's just a technique. You just have to keep
trying.
keep working on it.
Keep working on it and working on it until you get the. You could probably roll that end out farther too.
Well, this end, it's this here
Yeah.
that's thick. This doesn't seem to be as thick, so we'll see.
Yeah, roll it out along like this way.
This way.
Yeah, roll it out this way.
Let's see if we can do that way.
Sometimes it doesn't take that much. That's what I remember it looking like when Mom did it. It's kind of roll out and
long,
stay
yes.
it and long and.
Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of, you know, figuring out how the dough works for you. And even, like I said, see, these are a couple little bit thick, and before I crimp them, I may just roll them out a little bit to get more out of it.
You're gonna have more meat.
Yeah, I am, so. Looks a little bit better. But again, you don't want it too thin either, because you don't want it to break in the cooking process. So.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna just add my little meatballs there. Like I said, I might maneuver those a little bit and see if I can get them maybe 2 for 1.
What's the score now? Still
I think it's
31-20?
yeah.
Fourth quarter. They need 2 touchdowns to win.
Right.
Ohio State needs 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to win.
Or a touchdown and a field goal to tie it.
No, it's an 11-point game.
Oh, you're right.
Okay.
Almost intercepted.
Okay, those seem a little bit nicer as in, let's see what we can do with this. And then you have to get creative with some of the,
Well, that one doesn't work for my phone.
does it?
No.
There's got 3 different,
No, at all. There's a, well, the one that's plugged in, this could be for either or, right? So, long plug. These are a different type of ends than mine. That's, yeah, got one of these for.
That'll work.
Come on, Michigan, hold up your end of the bargain.
So those seemed a lot better. All right, now I'm going to go back to these one that are really, really thick and try to roll them out a little bit more. Because they're just super thick. Now, will I get 2 out of there? Maybe.
Maybe just try.
I mean, see how thick they were?
Mm-hmm. Up a little bit more. Need some more flour. Turn over. Nothing. Uh-oh.
No way.
So we have enough for 2 on this one.
His feet never came down.
Okay. I have a couple more that I'm going to try to squeeze a couple more out of. So the goal is basically to not overfill too much meat in the size pocket that you have, but you can always manipulate with your fingers to stretch that dough out a little bit. But you don't want holes in the dough, so careful about that, because that one we're probably going to lose. So if I have a chance and I have extra dough pieces, I can just try to patch that up. It might work, it might not. Anyway, so the next step is you want to take a fork and then crimp the edges. Now, don't do some of these, Dave, because I want to see if I can get a couple more out of those.
Okay.
Like this one's really thick too. See, these are thicker ones. Do these ones here. Then once you crimp them, and again, you want to be careful when you crimp them. You want to make sure that you're closing the 2 sides of the dough together. So sometimes you can do both sides like this, and then you want to make sure that you're getting a nice deep but not piercing the dough. You also want to be careful of the meat pocket here. So you don't want to be pushing the tines into the meat pocket, because that will definitely cause that little Klatski to lose its filling when it's cooking. So use some flour so it doesn't stick, and then sometimes you can even crisscross on the corners. That's what it should look like. That one's a littler one, but works out good. Last thing is to do is to cook them. So you're going to cook them in boiling water. You want to add some salt to that water, and it's cooking for 15 to 20 minutes. I notice they cook a little bit faster when they're fresh. From frozen, it's more like 20 minutes, 22 minutes. The dough is the hardest part, and so if you can figure that out, or figure out what works for you, it'll go by much easier. That's it. hopefully you enjoy.
Ooh.